Well, kiddos, here you go. So we discussed the slope and how to interpret it. You guys, this is not, again, this is not the end-all be-all sentence. You just have to make sure that your exam score goes with the correct number and you know it decreases and your anxiety score increases. And then, as you probably have noticed, I have made a mistake yet again. But when you plug in 15, your predicted value is 54.2305. Now, we are going to find the residual, which we haven't talked about. But the residual is very important as it tells us what's the difference between our observed and our predicted, and it tells us how well our least squares regression line is doing predicting. Okay, so to find the residual, we're just going to write it here, and then we'll go to our notes. Residual, it is equal to the observed, which is your y, minus your predicted, which is your y hat. The closer to 0 the residual is, the better your least squares regression line is doing predicting. The larger your residual is, their least squares regression line is not doing a good job predicting. Does that make sense? So you want that residual to be as close to 0 as possible. So our observed for 15 was 60. So we're going to do 60 minus our predicted, which is 54.2305. And you get 5.7695. So that's your residual. We'll talk about residual plots tomorrow, but for right now, that's your observed minus predicted, and you know that your residual is 5.7695. On the AP exam, you guys, they will give you negative 5.7695 because they're going to bank that you forget that it was observed minus predicted, and you're going to do predicted minus observed. So make sure that you pay attention to signs on this type of question. And yes, you guys, they'll give you a question just that simple. What is the residual? Okay, now here's the next question. Would you use your least squares regression line to predict an exam score for a person who had an anxiety score of 35? Why or why not? Okay, Amy?
No, because extrapolating with a value that's far from the value used to calculate a regression line is unlikely to produce accurate results.
Correct. So it's extrapolation, right? 35 isn't even in our range. What's the largest score that we have? And the anxiety score? It's 23, right? 35 is way above that. So that question is looking for, do you know that that's extrapolation? And do you know that extrapolation is unreliable? That's what that question is testing. If this was an AP question, you guys, probably this would be worth 1 point. Like this would be an E, P, or I. This would be graded as an E, P, or I. These two would probably be together, E, P, and I, and then this would be E, P, and I. So even though there's 5 parts, this still would be 4. And you would have to get, and I want to point out that if you do not put it with context of the problem, you just went from an E to a P on that one, automatically. Let's say you got the wrong score. Let's say you got the wrong slope here. But then you put it down here, you put it in the right context. Like you might get an I on this, but let's say you followed through and you did everything else correctly. you could still get 3 points. Does that make sense? Like, they're not going to penalize you because of A, because everything builds on that one. Okay? Okay, so again, E would be extrapolation, and exactly what Amy said was perfect. Anybody else have something else that they wrote? Did anyone get to that problem? Just make sure in there there's something about extrapolation. Okay. What does it say? Construct and interpret. What is the value? We're not going to do the back yet. We're going to do the back tomorrow because I don't want to do residual plots yet. So we're going to move to this algae problem. So a study was performed to determine the effect of a temperature on a pond's algae level. Temperature 1 was measured in degrees Fahrenheit, and algae level was measured in parts per million. Consider the computer output below. So the reason I give you this one is because a lot of times when they give you on the AP exam, when they give you something to deal with this linear regression, they don't give you data to put in your calculator. They give you computer output. So I want to show you the different things of the computer output. So the constant, this one right here, is your y-intercept. Always, your constant is your y-intercept. So, and it's this number right here. So this number is your y-intercept. But for your y-intercept, you go constant and you go across. Temperature, whatever word's right here, this is your slope. So that number is your slope. Yes?
I don't have that side.
R squared, it's exactly that. We're going to talk about R squared, but R squared, that's exactly that. So to find R, what do you think you need to do? Take the square root of R squared. So R equals the square root. Make sure you change it to a decimal. That's how you find R, okay? Do not worry about R squared adjusted. We're not going to do anything with that. We're going to do R squared. Those two numbers, so you will always get R squared. You have to find R. And the very last thing is this is called the standard deviation of the residuals. So you probably can't see that. You guys can't probably see that. So the standard deviation of the residuals is this 0.4224. I know they give you standard deviation in the other stuff. We don't have to worry about that just yet. That will come back to us because we'll come back to least squares regression in our last unit. But this is stuff that you need right now. Okay. I will give you computer output and you will be expected to know how to read it. The AP exam will give you computer output and you will be expected to know how to read it. So the first question is, write the equation of the least squares regression line, identify any variables used. You guys, you know, they're not going to tell you, hey, identify those variables. You know you have to do that. Okay, so what are we trying to predict?
The algae level in parts per million.
So we're just going to put algae level. You don't have to put parts per million. Okay. So what is your A? What's your y-intercept?
42, 48, 47,
And then what is my slope?
0.4762.
You don't have to put the 0. And then you're going to multiply it by what? What's the word that's going to go there? Temperature. That right there will give you an E. That's what you're striving for. I will take points off if you don't do that. I'm pretty sure that you guys understand, interpret the slope now. As algae level increases by 0.4762, the temperature increases by 1 degree Fahrenheit. Okay? Now, identify, interpret the correlation coefficient. So the correlation coefficient is R. Okay? So correlation coefficient is R. And to find R, I've already explained it, is to take the square root of R squared. It's literally, like, there isn't anything that you guys have to worry. It's just R. Thank you. And then what do you get when you guys are?
0.9576.
Perfect. So, if this is a AP question and they love, like, this is a great AP question, except that they won't tell you identify any of the variables, but this is a great AP question. And what will happen most likely is this will follow through to what we're going to do in our last unit, you guys. So this would all be one. Right here, if you did this, you went from, and you didn't know how to interpret it, you would get a P. Sometimes you would just get an I because they might grade it all together. So what does this mean? 0.9576. What does that mean? There is a strong, now, in context, right? We haven't looked at a picture, but from that what should it mean? That there is a strong, linear, positive. You guys, you can use the word relationship or association. Stay away from correlation. They don't like that word. I always use association. That's the one I choose. I've seen relationship and that one is good, but stay away from correlation. So 0.9576 means that there is a strong, linear, positive, because it's linear, it should be a line. It's a positive number, so that's where I got positive. Association between, and now you need to always put it back in the context of that problem. Between algae level, or I put between temperature and algae level. Why I can't spell level today, I don't know. That right there gives you an E. That also could be a great multiple choice question. Okay, so identify and interpret the standard deviation of the residuals. So the standard deviation of the residuals is 0.4224. So they're testing you. Can you look at the computer output and pick out your residuals, that standard deviation? That's the first thing, because I want to see if you can read this computer output. The second thing is, can you interpret it? So I'm going to interpret it for you. Residuals are based on that predicted, right? So the predicted, and what are we trying to predict? Algae levels. So the predicted algae levels differ from the observed, because again, We are talking, a residual is talking about the difference between observed and predicted by an average of about, average about 0.4224.